Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about division using decimals. In this video, we're going to be focusing on decimals divided by decimals. To get us started, we have 5/10 divided by 25/100. Now, 5/10 is our dividend, so that number goes on the inside, and 25/100 is our divisor, so that number goes on the outside when we're doing long division. Now, when we're dividing by decimals, we have to make our divisor a whole number. And in order to do that, we're going to multiply it by our power of 10. So either 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, whatever it takes to make that number a whole number. In this case, because we're working with the hundreds, we're going to multiply it by 100. And whatever we do to our divisor, we also have to do to our dividend. So we multiply both of them by 100. So we know that 5/10 divided by 25/100 is the same as 50 divided by 25. Like the value, the answer, the quotient will be the same. And so then we ask ourselves, does 25 go into 5? Well, it doesn't. But 25 does go into 50. 2 times, and so that's because 25 times 2 is equal to 50. So we're going to take that and then subtract, and then we get 0. That means that 5/10 divided by 25/100 is equal to 2. Here we have 3 and 556 thousandths divided by 1 4/10. Now, 3 and 556 thousandths is our dividend, so that number goes on the inside, and 1 4/10 is our divisor, so that number goes on the outside. And now we have to multiply 1 4/10 by a power of 10 to make it a whole number. And in this case, we would multiply it by 10. And then whatever we do to our divisor, we also have to do to our dividend. So we also have to multiply that by a power of 10. Now, it's okay that our dividend is still a decimal, so we'll just divide it from there. So this means that 3 and 556 thousandths divided by 1 4/10 would give us the same thing as 35 and 56 hundredths divided by 14. So we just go ahead and divide normally. So 14 does not go into 3. But it does go into 35 2 times, and that's because 14 times 2 is equal to 28. So we take the 35 and subtract it by 28. 35 minus 28 is equal to 7. And notice here that the next thing we have is our decimal point, so make sure you do bring that up. And then we could go ahead and bring our 5 down. So we have 75, and we have to ask ourselves, how many times does 14 go into 75? And that would be 5 times, and that's because 14 times 5 is equal to 70. We write our 70 down, and then we subtract. 75 minus 70 is equal to 5. Then we go ahead and bring the 6 down, and we have 56. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 14 go into 56? And well, that would be 4 times because 14 times 4 is equal to 56. And then we go ahead and subtract, and we have no remainder. So 3 and 556 thousandths divided by 1 4/10 is equal to 2 and 54 hundredths. Now let's do 3 and 6/10 divided by 3 and 2/10. 3 and 6/10 goes on the inside because that's our dividend, and 3 and 2/10 goes on the outside because that's our divisor. And then we multiply our divisor by a power of 10 to make that a whole number. So in this case, we would multiply it by 10. And then we do the same thing that we did to our divisor to our dividend. And so we know that 36 divided by 32 would give us the same answer as 3 and 6/10 divided by 3 and 2/10. And so we divide normally. So 32 does not go into 3, but 32 does go into 36. one time. And that's because 32 times 1 is equal to 32. And so then we subtract. 36 minus 32 is equal to 4. Now, since we have a remainder, we're going to add a decimal point at the end and add a 0 and keep going and see what we get. So we bring down, well, before we bring down the 0, we bring up our decimal point, and then we bring down our 0 and keep dividing. And so we ask ourselves, how many times does 32 go into 40? 32 goes into 40 one time, and that's because 32 times 1 is equal to 32. Then we subtract. 40 minus 32 is equal to 8. So since we still have a remainder, we're going to go ahead and add another 0, and then bring that down. And then ask ourselves, how many times does 32 go into 80? And that would be 2 times, because 32 times 2 is equal to 64. And then we go ahead and we subtract. And 80 minus 64 is equal to 16. We still have a remainder, so we're going to add another 0 and bring it down. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 32 go into 160? And that would be 5 times, because 32 times 5 is equal to 160. Then we go ahead and we subtract, and we have no remainder. So that means that 3 6/10 divided by 3 2/10 is equal to 1 125 thousandths. Our final example is 12 5/10 divided by 5 hundredths. 12 5/10 goes on the inside because that's our dividend, and 5 hundredths goes on the outside because that's our divisor. And then we're going to go ahead and multiply our divisor by a power of 10 to make it a whole number. And then that means we would multiply it by 100 to make it a whole number. And whatever we do to our divisor, we do to our dividend. So we multiply both of those by 100. And so we get 1,250 divided by 5, and that would give us the same answer as 12 5/10 divided by 5 hundredths. So 5 doesn't go into 1, but it does go into 12 2 times, because 5 times 2 is equal to 10. And then we go ahead and we subtract. 12 minus 10 is equal to 2. And then we bring down our 5. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 25? Well, that would be 5, because 5 times 5 is equal to 25. So then we add 25 below that, and we subtract. And we get 0. Bring down our final 0, and ask ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 0? And that would be 0 times. And we would not get a remainder here. And so we could subtract these, but we would still get 0. That means that 12 5/10 divided by 5 hundredths is equal to 250. And that's it.